Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Cardboard Herald. I'm Andrew Birkett. I'm the CEO of Atheris Entertainment, and I'm filling in for Jack today. My guest is JB Howell, another local Orlando-based board game designer. So, JB, can you explain a little bit more about the Orlando board game design community for everyone?
Sure. In the Orlando, greater Orlando area, within about an hour's time, we have upwards of 30 game designers. I think at last time I counted, 14 of them have published games, either self-published through Kickstarter or published through either small or mid-market publishers, and including some of the large publishers in the industry. So we have a pretty vibrant community in Orlando. We try to get together twice a week. We usually have anywhere from 8 to 16 designers and playtesters that show up at our weeknight meetings. And about every 3 months, we try to set up a Florida game design meetup. So we include the Tampa, Jacksonville, kind of surrounding communities that are within about 2 hours of Orlando. And we can get upwards of 30 to 40 people at those events. So we have a pretty active community in Orlando, and we try to bring in new people all the time. Lots of game designers that are trying to get into the hobby, and lots of game designers that are kind of trying to make a name for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very interested to become a part of that community when I moved to Orlando. I lived in Gainesville, and so it's a significantly smaller city. I just lived there for the University of Florida. And when I moved to Orlando, I was surprised with how big the game design community was. How long have you been a part of the group?
I would say, I guess about 2 years now.
Oh, wow.
So I've been in Orlando much longer than that, and I didn't even realize that there was a game design community here until one of my friends at the Dice Tower convention kind of pointed me to the group, and that's how I got involved. And I think they've been established as a group for maybe 1 to 2 years longer than I've been there. It's a really good thing.
Obviously, you have several games that have been are being published, and a few that are going to Kickstarter now. So we'll talk about a few of those. But just for everyone else that doesn't know, how many games do you have signed, having that you don't have any physical games in your hand yet? Because this is an impressive number.
It's at 9 right now. I have a few other games that I have out in front of publishers being reviewed, but I have 9 games under contract. The first of which is going to be released in January, and I have over the next 6 months there should be 4 games going to 3 games going to Kickstarter, and then another one next summer. There's 9 games that I have that should be coming out over the next 18 months.
That's amazing, and I'm sure it's going to be awesome, since a few of them I know are Kickstarting at the same time. When you start receiving all of the games, you're going to be like, oh my god.
I know. I am looking forward to it very much. That's a moment that I can't wait to have.
So one of the ones that I know is going to be a bigger game, and something people are really interested in, is you've designed Reavers of Midgard. So I know that is Kickstarting sometime in October. I don't know if you know.
Actually, yesterday they announced that the launch date is November 1st.
Would you like to go into a little bit more about how the game design process came to be, and sort of a little bit more about the game?
Sure. Yeah, that game is a bit of a unique path relative to the other games that I have. But I started initially designing a post-apocalypse survival game. It was a dice allocation game that was really what I started with was I kind of wanted to experiment with role selection as a mechanism. I do a lot of my game design from the ground up. I like to start with mechanisms and just start kind of stretching the bounds of them, see what I can do interesting with them, and a game typically emerges from there. So I had this, I would call it a lightweight Euro. maybe a gateway Euro is maybe a good term, which was this post-apocalypse role selection dice allocation game. And I showed it to Grey Fox Games, and they really liked it. Shane over at Grey Fox is a visionary guy, and what he saw was a dice allocation game that was single worker placement. It kind of fit the model of Champions, but in a more Euro sense. And so he asked me if I would be interested in retheming the game and putting together a version that we could call Reavers of Midgard. So I did that, and everything worked out from there. That was at Dice Tower last year, 2017. And so we've continued development of the game over the past year, and now it's nearly finished and ready to go to Kickstarter.
Yeah, and it's definitely an awesome game. I've played Champions and Reavers, and I think they're very different and with a lot of similarities as well. It's kind of one of those interesting things that shares a lot of the core idea while implementing it in a different way. People are going to really, really enjoy that one, and I know you have a few games with Colossal, but before we talk about those, I wanted to kind of ask you, so you start with mechanisms, and I know your game design process is really interesting to me, and I'm sure it will be interesting to some other people, because I know, like, when you have a game and it gets to the table the first time, it always seems significantly more polished than my crummy prototypes on cards and with little sticky notes and that sort of thing. So what do you think you would explain kind of your typical game design process?
Most of the time, I am just starting with a core mechanism, and I like to experiment. So, in the case of Reavers, I was looking at role selection. I really like role selection and simultaneous action selection. Those are two of my favorite mechanisms because they're very engaging. Both of those mechanisms allow all players to play on all turns. So it's one of those game experiences where you're fully engaged in the game, start to finish. It's not one of those games where you go and make a sandwich when it's not your turn. And so I really wanted. I had not done anything with role selection, and I really wanted to. So most of my game design processes start with trying to do something new and interesting with a mechanism, or trying to blend mechanisms that typically don't go together in a way that's intuitive and seamless, right? Because I want the end product to show a really nice marriage of mechanisms, or a really elegant way to do something. And so that's really where I start. I start with a mechanism, and then I build some sort of engine around it. And then from there, I start to think about what logically or what intuitively matches when it comes to a theme. Is there something in the flow of the mechanisms or that leads to a naturally engaging theme? And then I start to work to build the theme and the narrative after that. Last time I checked, the Dropbox was 32 different game designs in my folder, and I would say maybe 3 of those started from the top down, where I started with a theme or a narrative first. So I definitely work bottom up most of the time.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen that, and a lot of your mechanisms are really interesting and unique, and I'm sure now that more people, a greater audience, are going to be able to play your games than just the Orlando game design community, they'll get to see all that cool stuff that you've been developing. So then I guess the other question I have to that end is, when you go to the typically our Monday night meetings, how much solo playtesting do you typically do of your games before introducing it to the group? Almost
none. Okay. I really hate playing things solo. I'm not a fan of playing published board games solo. My engagement with board gaming is the social aspect with other people. So playtesting something solo is something I've only done, I think, for 2 different games, and both of those were purely card games, where I was just trying to, and I wasn't even really playing the game solo as much as just trying to get the cycling rhythm working correctly. Because when I make card games, I like to do really interesting things with the way that they cycle or the way that the cards move through different play areas and decks. And so sometimes those cycling engines can be tricky, and those are really the only games that I've ever played solo. So when I break a brand new game out on a Monday night, it's never been played before.
Very cool. That's interesting. I know a lot of your games seem so fleshed out, and I'm sure that that's a part of your game design process. You kind of go through it over your head and probably do a lot more in your mind than I do.
I do. I think it through. I obsess about it, really, and I think it through to its conclusion. Before I actually put the prototype together, I might be thinking about it for 2 to 3 weeks in terms of how it should work, and before I actually sit down to take the notes that I have and put together the game. So I think a lot of that also just has to do with experience. I know I don't have published games, so it might sound a little bit strange to say that I've got a lot of game design experience in that respect, but I started designing games when I was in grade school, and I did it as a hobby for 25 years before I really started pursuing publishing. So I've been doing it a really long time, and I think a lot of it has to do with experience in terms of getting shorter iterations, getting closer to a polished game in a fewer number of iterations, and having that first iteration be playable. I think that mostly just has to do with experience and repetition.
Yeah, that makes sense. You definitely have designed quite a bit more than me, and so I can see where that experience would be helpful. So what led you to, from having designed games for a long period of time, what led you to start actually looking to sign some?
It was really encouragement from a good friend of mine and my wife. It was not long after my wife and I had our first child, and I was just kind of reflecting on, well, that's a path that I could have taken and chose not to. And a good friend of mine and my wife, they both said to me, well, why is that a closed door, right? You can do this. And so really, I think it was probably just inspired by the types of feelings and emotions that come with having a child, and just reflecting on the different paths you take. I decided to give it a shot, and some of it's luck. Living in Orlando, we have Cool Stuff Inc. here based out of Orlando. I knew a fair number of people that worked at the store. Cool Stuff had just started their publishing side with Gray Fox Games at the time they were affiliated, and so it was kind of like a ground floor opportunity, and I was able to get a pitch in. I had no idea what I was doing because I'd never even talked to a publisher before, but I was able to showcase one game, Elements and Idols, to them. They liked it enough to have continuing conversation. I didn't actually sign the game with them until about 2 years later, because I still wasn't kind of fully committed into doing game design yet. But over those 2 years, I really did dive in deep, designed a lot of games and polished up Elements and Idols, and was able to sign it with Gray Fox, and that was the first game I've signed. And that was a few years ago, and that one's going to Kickstarter. It should be the first quarter of next year. So really kind of having a publisher here in the Orlando area. Now, I know that Gray Fox has since moved to St. Louis, but at the time they were based out of Orlando here. Having access to kind of the gaming community resources that Cool Stuff offers, I felt a little bit lucky having an end to that first conversation. It was a cold call, but it was a cold call with a lead. Yeah,
that definitely is helpful to be close in proximity and be able to get that personal connection. I know that a large part of some of the games we've signed is I've met the designers and I know I can work with them and I like working with them, and so I'm sure that definitely helped that you're a cool, approachable guy, and Shane is super cool, so I'm sure that both of you got along, and then obviously have signed several games together. So I'm sure that one is going to be also a cool one to get the physical product, since it was the first game you had signed.
Yeah, that one's going to feel really good. I've been waiting a long time to publish that game, and it's interesting because it's a deck building board game hybrid, and I designed it almost 8 years ago. Before the explosion of Clank and some of the other deck building hybrid games, because you can't really just design a straight deck building game anymore. That style of game is kind of owned by the big boys in the industry with Legendary and with like Upper Deck and Fantasy Flight, and the really big companies kind of own that market with their IPs. And so if you're making a straight deck building game, I don't think you're going to get anywhere. So I started exploring deck building board game hybrids that many years ago, and Elements and Idols was kind of the result of that. And so yes, I will be very excited when that one comes out. That was my first signing, and that one holds a special place.
Yeah, are there any other ones that you just feel like a specific game that maybe it's like your favorite design or anything that has already been signed? Or
yeah, I would say Flotilla has to fit that bill. So Flotilla is a game that I co-designed with Mike Mihilsik, another game designer that lives here in the Orlando area, and we work really well together. And it's a heavy Euro. I love Euros. I love designing Euros. But this is a very unique game. It's doing things that you just don't see in the market. So when it comes out, it will have its own little place. It's very difficult to try to compare it to other types of games. I think the closest cousin would be Concordia, which was kind of an inspiration for the initial design. That game is signed with WizKids. I think it's coming out around Essen of next year, although I don't know that we have a formal release date. So that's just chatter. But I'm really looking forward to that. I think that's probably my best pure design work. Mike and I together. And so I'm really proud of that game. And there's another game that I have signed with WizKids that unfortunately I can't talk about because of a non-disclosure agreement. But it is also a really solid design, and I'm excited about that game. I think that game can be special.
Yeah. I've not played Flotilla yet, but I want to. Every time I want to play it. We've been play testing Ruins of Mars for Dawn, and so I have not had a chance to play it, but I want to. It's on my list.
Yeah, well, you'll get an opportunity because we're going to keep breaking it out. But we're very close. I mean, that game is about 98% done. We're trying to get it wrapped up by the end of the year so that it can start on the art assets and the kind of pre-production process. So that game is nearly done. We'll be play testing it for the rest of the year, so you'll have an opportunity. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it. So I am interested in this. How awesome is it getting our assets and seeing the game develop as a designer? For me, I have to pay for it, so it's not as fun.
You know what? It's actually pretty amazing. The artwork that was done for Reavers of Midgard kind of blew me away. I just I have a product vision, and I'm one of those game designers that likes to bring a product vision to the table. So when I pitch a game with a publisher, I usually lay out my product vision, what I would like to see out of not just the design, but the full product, art direction and things like that. And for publishers that are willing to kind of engage at that level, I always have a high appreciation of it. But to see it realized and the quality of the art that goes with it, it kind of blows me away. So I'm still waiting to see kind of the full. I haven't seen any of my games with really the full art asset spread on like the final production copy. or pre-production copy of the game. I think the first one I'll get the chance to see that is for Papillon, which is a Colossal Games product that's going to Kickstarter next month. And the art assets for that are nearly complete, and I've got to play one prototype with most of the art assets, and that was really cool. Because that's a very beautiful game.
Yeah, it is very pretty. You should definitely explain sort of some of the art for that game, because I'm sure people are really going to think it's beautiful and be blown away by how pretty it is.
Yeah, that's a game that I did start from the ground up with mechanisms, but that is one of those rare designs where from the beginning I knew what I wanted to do in terms of a final product. I set out with that game to make a game that had tremendous table presence. I wanted a really elegant game that is the type of game that could turn heads at a game shop when people walk by, because they see kind of pop-up components that kind of stand up off the table, but not in a miniatures based game, but in a lighter tile laying experience. So I set out from the beginning to make a visually stunning product, and then attach kind of a lightweight but really interesting tile laying area control blend with it. And so the Papillon was the end result of that. And from the moment that I had the initial conversations with Travis at Colossal, he was on board with the product. He also wanted in his catalog a really beautiful looking game with strong table presence. Most of the Colossal games have strong table presence like that. The game that they kickstarted back in February is Kami-sama is a really beautiful game. So that, they go out of their way to make a high quality product, and that's why it was a perfect match. So that I'm really looking forward to that game. It's got some really interesting, the flowers stand up off the table. The butterflies kind of attached to the flowers in an interesting way. So like it has a strong table presence, but it's got a really nice feel to it as well, in the way that you interact with the components. So that's a rare game for me. I don't typically design starting with a product vision, but with that one, that was the goal from the beginning.
Colossal is definitely a great fit. All of their games are gorgeous, and Travis is really killing it. The whole Colossal team, obviously, are just doing awesome with their one Kickstarter a month vision, which everyone sort of thought was impossible, and they're doing excellent with it. So
right, exactly. Yeah, no, I'm very happy to be working with Travis and Colossal. It was a great fit, I think, from the very beginning.
Yeah, and I had a funny experience with Travis the other day. His uncle is actually fixing part of my house, and my dad hired this guy, and then I was talking to him. I was like, yeah, I own a board game company. He's like, oh, my nephew owns a board game company. I was like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, his name's Travis Trance. I was like, what? I totally know Travis. What? So,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. So apparently some of his family lives in Orlando still. That was interesting. I was like, that total weird coincidence. Normally when I'll tell people I own a board game company, they'll look at me weird, or they'll be like, oh, do people still play board games? So it was the first time I've ever had anyone be like, yeah, I know someone that does that. I was like totally blown away. Yeah,
well, I mean, that should start to become more and more common, right? I mean, the industry is as big as it's ever been. So
yeah,
hopefully the experience is more recognizing the popularity of board games, and not looking at it, with a sideways eye.
Yeah, that's definitely the hope, but it's just kind of, like I said, it's different from some of my other interactions with people, so it's funny.
Right.
So that one you said is kickstarting in October?
Yeah, so I haven't seen an actual launch date, but the last conversation I had was October. If it slides, I don't expect it to slide past November, so I'm expecting it to kickstart here soon.
That and Reavers, the only two for this year, and the rest are in 2019, or?
Yeah, that's right. So
okay.
Papillon and Reavers of Midgard will kickstart over the next 2 months, and then Chio's Secret is a game that I have coming out with WizKids. That should be January, or I guess I'll just call it first quarter of 2019. Elements and Idols should be kickstarting with Grey Fox Games first quarter of next year. That was the last conversation I had. But again, those types of dates are never set.
Yeah.
Right. So it could change. And then for the rest of the year, I have the two other games coming out with WizKids. So Chio's Secret was WizKids. And the game I can't talk about is WizKids, and I think that's a 2019 release. And then Flotilla is with WizKids as well, and that should be Essen of 2019. And then possibly next year, I'm not entirely sure. It could be next year, end of next year, or first quarter of 2020. I have another co-design with Mike Mihilsik called Wayward Vale that is with Penguin and Panda Productions, which is affiliated with Big Kid Games.
Okay.
They're kickstarting their first game, Onimaru, next month. And so Wayward Vale is either going to be late 2019 or early 2020 with Penguin and Panda Productions. And then I also have a game with Quick Simple Fun Games, which I think is either next year or early part of 2020 as well.
Cool. I didn't even know you had one with QSF.
I do, yeah. It's a light card game. I don't make light games.
That's why I didn't know.
Yeah, most people will not affiliate my design portfolio with, something that's quick, simple, or fun. But yeah, I've tried to expand my portfolio. I make a lot of Euros, especially I really like making what I call gateway Euros, because I think there's something really, really clever and marketable about a game that can pull in the Euro audience and can pull in the hobby audience and have both of those audiences engaged. So, just at the very sort of heavy end for the casual hobby gamer, but at the light end, for the Euro gamer. I like those designs that cross that middle, but I don't make very many light games. But Danger Zone, that's the game with Quick Simple Fun. It is a very light card game that essentially is a blend of Uno and Blackjack with a side of dice. So it's a very fun, easy to learn family game. I've only designed one of those, and that's it.
That's I think all I design. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty positive that's all I design. Light, simple games.
Well, they're honestly hard to do. I find lightweight games more difficult than medium or heavyweight games personally, because light games have to be very simple. They have to be clever, but they can't be too familiar. So you have to somehow come up with something that's both easy and familiar, but unique enough that it's not just a reproduction of another light game.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, the lightweight games are really challenging, especially to make it be a meaningful game and not just an activity.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. There's difficulties, I guess, of each for different designers. I have difficulty with the math of bigger games, so that's the part that gets me. But when I just try to design anything larger, and with simpler games, I feel like I try to make it too complicated, and then I'm like, oh no, people aren't going to be able to understand this weird, quirky rule that I made.
Yeah, well, I think that's common. I think most game designers, as they're gaining experience, but their early designs, they overcook everything. It takes experience to learn how to really trim things down to, what is the core, I often call it the soul of the game. What is the soul of the game, and you can't overcook from there. But I think that's pretty common for game designers to make things more complicated than they need to be in their initial draft.
Yeah. And I also obviously am the exact opposite for game design as you. I go with these weird, quirky theme ideas that I made stories for, and then I'm like, you know what, I could make a game for this 99% of the time, and then the other 1%, I'm like, oh, this mechanism sounds really cool. I will make a game around it, and I have no idea what the theme is. I feel like I definitely draw more inspiration from the storytelling aspect because I've always been a writer, and I think that's just sort of the avenue I'm drawn towards. But
yeah, you actually reminded me that I didn't mention the other Kickstarter that will be next year in the summertime is Nodon with Colossal Games, and that's basically a legacy game, and it is knee deep in narrative. The experience is all about the narrative. So that and Chio's Secret would be the two really heavy atmosphere kind of narrative driven games that I've designed. So I'm not averse to it. I actually love kind of diving into it. I think if I'm going to do a project that's really narrative driven and atmospheric, though, I don't want to half bake it, right? So I really, really try to make it a full experience, and those can be very time consuming.
Yeah, absolutely. And a legacy game, I'm sure, requires a substantial amount of play testing. So,
yes, I can't even calculate the number of games I could have designed and the amount of time that I've spent being on Nodon.
Though you have designed quite a few in a fairly short period of time, so that's another question I have. I know you work and you have kids, so where do you find all the time to do game design stuff? I'm just a workaholic. I'm just naturally, one of those. I sleep maybe 5 to 6 hours a night, and I don't like being bored, I think is what it comes down to. I very rarely am doing one thing at a time. If I'm watching, I'm a diehard Cubs fan. We're approaching the playoffs and it's killing me. But if I'm watching a baseball game, I'm watching the game and I'm doing something else at the same time. There's a handful of movies that I can watch and just be fully engaged in the movie. But for the most part, again, I have to be doing two things at the same time because I get incredibly restless, and my wife just doesn't want to be around me when I'm bored. I'm the worst person to be around when I'm bored. So after she and the kids go to bed, I'm not ready for bed because I'm a night owl. I go to bed around midnight or 1 every night. So I just started filling the time with game design as opposed to watching movies or playing video games, the types of things I might have done 10 years ago. I just started working again until it was bedtime. Yeah, I'm sort of the same way. When I'm doing one thing, I'm normally actually multitasking and doing two things. If I'm going to watch TV, I'm almost always doing social media work for there. So that's pretty much the only time I watch TV. It's background noise, I guess, is what it would most frequently actually be used for.
Yeah, right.
So you've signed with several large publishers, but are there any publishers that you're kind of really excited to want to work with and kind of want to design a game for their kind of line? Or
yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate over the last couple of years. I've been traveling to conventions. I've met a lot of people in the industry, and there are publishers that I have approached, trying to work with as a, I just like the types of products they put out. I really like the vision or the breadth of the catalog that they approach. So I've talked to Pandasaurus, and I've talked to Floodgate and Deepwater, and there's some other folks that I really enjoy either the people or the catalog, and so I am trying to work with those folks. I've also had conversations with James. I love James Hudson, and I've been fortunate that I've started to look at a little bit of IP work, and so I've had kind of that conversation with James. I'm wondering if I can put together a design for one of the product catalogs over at Skybound. So I think those are the folks that I've been talking to primarily. I would like to actually, get engaged with some of the European publishers for some of the heavier Euros that I like to design. Everything I've worked with so far has been publishers here in America, so I would like to start to put a toe in that water as well.
That would be very interesting. I'm sure there will be opportunities for you, for sure, to meet with some of the European publishers, and I'm very much looking forward to you working with James on some IP work. I think he would be very smart. It would be a wise decision to work together. I'm sure that would be awesome for both of you.
Yeah, I mean, I just had a basic conversation, and it's up to me to come up with something worthy.
Yeah.
So it's on my to-do list.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a massive to-do list, but
it is.
It'll be exciting. I think that's a game that I would be interested in. I'm going to have to buy all your storytelling, narrative-driven games for sure. Anything with an IP will be interesting, and I'm sure that would be exciting and kind of different and working within an existing structure.
Yeah, it'll be great because the first actual box I will have in hand will be Chio's Secret, because WizKids goes straight to retail. Whereas the other publishers I'm working with primarily use Kickstarter. And so when Chio's Secret comes out at the early part of next year, that'll be my first box in hand, and that is a really interesting game. It is very narrative driven. It's a hidden role deduction game, but the challenge that I laid out for myself because I don't like social deduction games at all. And that was kind of the challenge that I put in front of myself, is I wanted to make a social deduction game that I would like. And so the kind of first rule that I put in front of myself is there's not going to be any voting or accusations that lead to revealing somebody's role, which most of the social deduction games in the marketplace are, they're driven by players voting or one player accusing another. And so eliminating that as my kind of foundational rule for how I'm going to design this game naturally led to a very unique game. I think most of the people that have played it doesn't have a lot of comparables, but the one that usually comes up is Battlestar Galactica, just because it's one of the only other 60-minute hidden role deduction games that are very kind of a deep experience.
For someone like me that loves Battlestar Galactica, I'm sure that I will enjoy that one. I think you probably had that one signed before I was in Orlando, so I don't think I've ever played that one either.
Yeah, that sounds right, because I haven't play tested that with the Orlando group other than on occasion in a little over a year. Yeah,
I think I went back and forth between Gainesville. I took my last semester online, but I didn't really get into the Orlando community right when I came back. I was born and raised here, but then went to Gainesville for a few years and came back and was like, whoa, there's all this game design stuff that I didn't know about. That's kind of cool. Are there any games that you've been playtesting now, and has it had developing out all these other games that are going to be published limited your design ability?
Yes, for sure. So this year, I would say last year I designed somewhere around 12 or 13 games, and this year it's been 4 or 5. So I cut it way down because it just going through the development process of 9 different games across publishers all at the same time. I certainly bit off a bit more than I think most people can chew. So I kind of put a hiatus on new game design back in March because I really needed to bear down and focus on these games, like Reavers and Papillon, the ones that were kickstarting this year, finishing up Chio's Secret. Like I had to really bear down. And so it wasn't until August that I came up with another design. So there's about a 6-month hiatus from new game designs. And the one that I put together here recently is a fairly light card game, 30 minutes or less. So again, like the second lightest game I've ever designed. So it's not like I jump back in with anything complex. So yeah, for the rest of this year, I probably won't focus on new game designs. I'll just continue to circulate the ones that I'd already been working on. The only other, I don't know if I'd call it new, but I took a game that was finished. I wasn't able to sign. I wasn't getting a lot of traction on the pitches that I was doing, so I rethemed it and developed it in a new direction. And so that's the only other kind of newish work that I've done this year.
It's probably smart and wise to kind of go and develop those out and not focus on too many and throw too many eggs in the air at the same time, kind of thing. I know obviously the games, play testing them will make them a lot better, and getting those to be as good as they possibly can be is more important than developing out a bunch of new things.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've got a full hopper. I'm itching. There's 6 games that I'm just itching to get to the table, and right now they're just nothing but notes. And it's been that way. Those same 6 games have been there for almost a calendar year. So it's just one of those things where I started to burn out a little bit, pushing too hard last year. I'm incredibly happy with the success. I certainly wouldn't complain about it. But I did start to reach a burnout point, and I scaled way back for this year.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I don't think I could develop that many games at the same time. I'm actually impressed that you're able to remember all the rules to several games at one time. I don't even think I know the rules to my own games most of the time, and I only design one at a time. I'll be like, which rule did I know I changed this. What did I change it to? Which version is this?
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes I stop to think about how many games I have rules for in my head, and I'm not talking about just what I designed, but like all the games that I've played over the course of my life, and I remember the rules for all of them. It gets a little bit crazy when you start to think about how many games you can sit down and teach.
I couldn't. I'm the exact opposite. I don't even, I can't even remember, some of my favorite songs lyrics. My memory for that kind of stuff is just completely awful. I'll look sometimes and, people will be like, hey, you want to play this game that I designed? And I'll look at it and I'm like, yeah, let me just check what I did for this rule, and we'll look at the rule book. And people always make fun of me for it. And I'm like, I don't remember. So.
Yeah, no, I have a great memory for this stuff. I just have hundreds and hundreds of games in my head for the rules.
Significantly different from me. So yeah, I think that if I remembered any games, it would probably have to be something super light, and probably wouldn't be one I designed, because I've just seeing so many different iterations of it, I can't remember which one ended up being the final product. Yeah,
I do encounter that, especially with a game like No Dawn. I've been working on that game for so long, and it's gone through so many iterations that it just back in August I flew up to Indiana to work with the Colossal team, and we did a kind of 2-day powwow on the game. And I had to bring a rule book with me, for the current iteration, because some of the things just start to blend in my head, because that game has gone through so many iterations. I can't remember which is current on occasion, and unless I'm fully engaged in that game for a prolonged period of time, I have to go back and relearn it.
At least you have to still do that, or I would feel really bad about not remembering the games I'm designing one at a time. I definitely have a bunch of games in my head too that are in the hopper, but it's sort of similar to you. Less about design and more about, I just got so much in the publishing realm that I feel like I never have time to design my own stuff. I put it on my to-do list every week, and it's my most missed task. I'm like, I'm never going to actually get to this.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's tough working full-time and doing game design and publishing and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of work. So.
It is, and having a family life, it's an overload, yeah.
Yeah. I can't imagine having kids while doing all this stuff. Definitely do not envy that.
Yeah, it's a kind of a rare personality type that kind of thrives on just about 6 hours of sleep.
I don't know if I have any other questions for you. I think that's probably everything.
Awesome, man. Thanks. I appreciate the conversation. It's fantastic.
I try to just make it a conversation when I talk to people, and so I will normally like kind of think through of like, oh, what kind of questions, but I was like, I already know JB, so I have an idea of some of his game design process and stuff to ask him about.
Perfect, man. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks everyone for listening to the Cardboard Herald. Thank you, JB, for coming on the show. I appreciate it. I've been Andrew and filling in for Jack. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Cardboard Herald. As always, everything we do is ad-free and audience-supported. If you'd like to help keep it that way, find the Patreon link at the top of our webpage, cardboardherald.com. We have several levels of support with various rewards. If you enjoyed the show, we do a whole bunch of other stuff, including reviews, interviews, and recommendations across writing, podcasts, and video. You can find that on our YouTube channel or by visiting any of our social media or our website. So with that out of the way, thank you again for listening to the Cardboard Herald.